Hello everybody, Matthew here with the Bardlings Banter channel, bringing you actually a new series called The Cauldron, where we'll be going over aspects of homebrew and how to homebrew, why you would homebrew, and just generally giving examples. Today we will actually be creating a homebrewed creature that I kind of just came up with overnight called the Beaverfolk, which is pretty much exactly what you expect it to be. Animorphized, Beaverfolk, intelligent, strong, and crafty. So, without too much more delay, let's get into it. First off, what is homebrew? Well, homebrew in D&D basically says it's third-party content is really the most general definition of what homebrew is, but I would actually narrow that down even more to player and DM created content, particularly for their own table. So how do you go about creating a homebrew monster? Well, the first step I always use is to try to find something close in D&D to what I'm already trying to make. In this case, that's a hyper-intelligent beaver. So what is there close to that? So the way I created this monster is by first looking at something similar. So I want it to be a medium to a large creature. I need it to be relatively strong and durable with maybe a limited dexterity. And then the only other thing is I do want it to have, at least for a monster, moderate intelligence. What does moderate intelligence mean? Well, an average human intelligence in D&D is 10. That means you can understand languages and speak them, and you can learn additional languages with a score of 10. Additionally, you have the ability for problem solving, thinking tactically, and deception. At a score of 6, that's where you're getting into creatures like dolphins, ravens, and apes. So they have the ability for kind of complex problem solving, and they can understand language to a limited capacity, but they have no ability to really truly learn a language. So that's an intelligence score of 6. I'm kind of thinking about something kind of splitting the difference. So for this creature, I'm thinking an intelligence score of around 8 on average, with some a bit higher, maybe even able to speak the common language, and some a bit lower. So the average range would be anywhere from 6 to 10. So, apart from the intelligence, though, I literally just took the stats for a black bear and put them on this creature. So, the final actual ability scores will be a strength of 15, a dexterity of 10, a constitution score of 14, an intelligence score of 8, a wisdom score of 12, and a charisma score of 7. Aside from the intelligence score, there are a couple of other things that I do want to change. Again, from the Black Bear stat sheet when creating this Beaverfolk character. First off, the armor class of 11, which is just natural armor, that's probably going to stay the same. 11's fine. But I do see an option for particular Beaverfolk wearing leather armor, or even what we would call, mechanically splint mail armor, but have it be maybe made out of wood. Additionally, so the Black Bear has a keen smell ability that says it has advantage on wisdom checks that rely on smell. I'm going to go ahead and take that away and just give this Beaverfolk a swim speed equal to their running speed. And I'm going to change that from 40 for the Black Bear to just the normal 30 for the Beaverfolk. Also, again, getting rid of the climb speed. Beavers don't really climb. I don't see much reason for it to have that. As far as actions go, I see that the brown bear, or black bear rather, has a multi attack. I don't see any reason why the Beaverfolk wouldn't. Two attacks, one with its bite, one with its claws. Don't much see any reason to get rid of that, and pretty much everything on there can just stay the same. So that's the real key of Homebrew, guys, is finding a creature that is close enough to what you already want to do. Additionally, I went ahead and gave these creatures proficiency in light armor as well as proficiency in simple weapons. Simple weapons include things like clubs, slings, javelins, that sort of thing. So, yeah, there could definitely be a barbarian Beaverfolk with a big old wooden stick. So there you have it. That's the basic concept of how creating a homebrewed monster works. Clearly, that is a very simple version of creating a monster. That being said, though, there's always room for variety in any type of creature. So, as I said, like with the intelligence score, you could have a creature that's more intelligent than the average Beaverfolk or less intelligent than the average Beaverfolk. There could be one that's slightly stronger, one that's a little more dexterous. Play with the different scores. Additionally, play with their weapon proficiencies or armor proficiency. Maybe there is that Beaverfolk that really decided, you know what, I'm going to have a shield and I'm going to have heavy armor. The next obvious thing to add to these creatures would be spellcasting. Now, based on their scores, charisma-based casters would be pretty rare, so don't expect to see many bards or sorcerers when you meet a bunch of Beaverfolk, but I'm not saying that never happens. Additionally, wizards probably aren't the most common thing, with the, average intelligence about 8. But you know what? Druids, clerics, those would be, I'm not saying common, but not unheard of among the ranks of the Beaverfolk. And considering what they, do and how they act, I could see a situation where a Beaverfolk druid is the clan leader or clan elder. Frankly, I see this race quite like the frog folk, the Gripply, where they have probably a very good working relationship with the elves in the area, where maybe the elves trade with the Beaverfolk for their, wooden crafts, or maybe the Beaverfolk are uniquely able to harvest certain types of wood. So these are all flavorful elements that you can add to a homebrewed creature to make them more interesting. They don't just have to be a stat sheet. You can create elements of a culture. Again, with an intelligence score of 8, with a kind of a max intelligence score of 10, they could have a, albeit basic, tribal culture. Just to reiterate a little here, yeah, the basic creature that we just created might be relying on its claw and bite attack, and that's certainly an option in certain situations. But I would say most of these creatures have some sort of club, some sort of proficiency in some sort of ranged weapon, like a javelin, and, one or two of the group might even have access to some spells. So, speaking of spells and spell casting, how do you add spells to your homebrewed creature? Well, the simple way to do that is, again, kind of what we've been doing. There are many entries in different source books for basic druids and clerics that you can kind of tack on elements of to your creature. That's the basics of homebrew, guys. Do keep an eye on CR rating. As a rule of thumb, so let's say you find a creature that you want to use, and it's a CR rating of 2 2. And the other creatures that you've kind of combined to do this, they average, a CR rating of 1 or less than 1. Well, for each one you add, I would add one half of a CR rating per creature. This isn't a hard and fast rule, and it's not going to be very accurate. It never will be, because CR rating is inherently flawed. But again, using the example of a CR rating 3 creature, and then you have 2 other creatures that you've kind of tacked onto it, both, 1 or less than 1 CR rating. I would consider whatever creature you just created a CR rating 4, maybe even a CR rating 5, depending on what abilities you've given it. Again, try to find similar creatures to what you've just created and kind of base your CR rating for that creature on what you find. Another rule I try to use when creating Homebrew is to make sure that whatever creature I create cannot kill any one of my players within 2 rounds of combat. Something I have found as I become more experienced as a DM is the optimal amount of rounds for a combat, depending on the situation. This is, let's say, a non-boss fight combat, is about 5 rounds. Now, obviously, there's room for variety, and it is situational. Additionally, I would say for a boss fight, your average combat should last about 10 rounds. There's a reason I say this is actually because anything more than that, players start to get a little bored. That's where you get people starting to stack dice, losing interest, looking at other things, and generally just wanting the combat to be over. The real big reason why you want to do this is to make sure that whatever creature you've created cannot just one-shot any one of your characters. So, again, keep an eye on its average damage output per round. Keep an eye on whether or not it has multi-attack. But with all that, you also want to do the reverse. You don't want a monster that your characters can just one-shot in one turn. But you also want a creature that's HP is high enough to give them a challenge, but not so much that, again, they're getting bored. That does it for this first episode of the Cauldron. I will be uploading the stats for a couple of versions of the Beaverfolk onto D&D Beyond, so keep an eye out for that. Well, until next time, this has been Matthew with Bardling's Banter, wishing you all 1d10 worth of inspiration.